I'll begin by saying that I will split my time with the member for Lethbridge. Today, I rise on a motion to get to the truth in the SNC-Lavalin scandal. Now, a quick recap on how we got here, Mr. Speaker. A year ago, the Prime Minister had his Finance Minister introduce a budget amending the criminal code to allow powerful corporations accused of fraud, bribery, and other forms of corruption to get the charges shelved by signing something called deferred prosecution agreements. We were all wondering where this was coming from, who was advocating for such special deals, and we found out in February of this year when the Globe and Mail reported that the former Attorney General faced interference, veiled threats, pressure, hounding, and other inappropriate pressure from the Prime Minister and those around him to offer such a deal to SNC-Lavalin. SNC-Lavalin is a company facing over $100 million of fraud and bribery charges. Among the charges are that the company bought prostitutes for the former Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi, that they bribed him and his officials in order to defraud among the poorest people in the world of hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, the Prime Minister is acting in a manner that is highly unusual. To take a direct interest in a criminal trial of any kind would be strange on any day. But to try and defend alleged corporate criminals who've engaged in malfeasance on this scale is particularly unusual. Now, of course, the Prime Minister said he did nothing wrong, the story was false, and that his Attorney General was behind him all the way. Well, the next day, she resigned. The Prime Minister dismissed her, saying he was disappointed and surprised. We found out later during her testimony that he shouldn't have been either. The reality is she told him that she was worried about the level of interference by his office. And that brings me to numerous unanswered questions we now need to pursue. One, the Prime Minister said she never raised any concerns with me at all. If she was worried about the 20 times my office and my officials contacted her about this criminal prosecution, why didn't she say something? Well, it turns out she did. On September 17th, yes, she did, despite the heckling against her again by Liberal members across the way, and shame on them for heckling a fellow Liberal member. That is shameful. But yes, she did. On September 17th, she told the Prime Minister, "Are you interfering with my role as Attorney General? Because if you are, I strongly advise against it." That was September 17th. The Prime Minister was stating a falsehood when he said otherwise. Then he said, "It's all about jobs. If this powerful Liberal-linked corporation does not get its charges shelved, 9,000 jobs will vanish into thin air." Well, when his top advisor, Gerald Butts, appeared before committee, the Green Party leader asked him, "Do you have any evidence that 9,000 jobs would disappear?" His answer, "Nothing specific." That was after 2 hours of testimony where he claimed that he was tied in knots about all the families that would lose their jobs. And then we asked Michael Wernick, the clerk of the Privy Council, who had been involved in all of the meetings and proceedings leading up to this interference, "What reports do you have to prove that 9,000 jobs would vanish?" Nothing in particular. All of this aroused suspicion that the jobs claim was a bunch of nonsense. Suspicion that is supported by a lot of evidence. Let me lay out that evidence. One, the company has the 5 biggest construction projects in Canada now, worth $52 billion. I want to offer a little bit of a hint about how construction jobs work for our friends across the way. They have to be done where the construction project is. So, for example, in Ottawa, SNC-Lavalin has been retained to build the North-South Mass Transit Project, $600 million project. It lays track from near downtown Ottawa all the way out deep into the south end of the city. They cannot build rail in Beijing or London, England, and drop it from a helicopter onto the nation's capital. They have to build it in the city. And the same is true with all construction projects that SNC-Lavalin is doing in this country. The second claim regarding jobs the government makes is that, well, if the company gets convicted, they'll lose all access to federal contracts. Well, we now know that's not true, because the public procurement minister is already making revisions to the procurement policy allowing convicted corporate criminals to continue to bid if they get an exemption. Wow. SNC-Lavalin has already earned such an exemption, or at least been granted one, early in the days of the Liberal government. In fact, it was one of the very first acts that this Liberal government rushed to take. Exactly. In December of 2015, the company, which had been banned from federal bidding after being charged with fraud and bribery, was then given an exception by this government to continue bidding, and they plan to do exactly the same thing even if a conviction occurs. In other words, if they're just worried about protecting the bidding opportunities for federal projects, then they can do that without preventing the trial from going ahead. So that is a fallacious excuse as well. Next, they said the Prime Minister told the Attorney General that this is back in September, that if she did not immediately shelve the charges into SNC-Lavalin's corruption, the company would move its headquarters to London, England. He made that claim twice in that meeting. The clerk of the Privy Council also made that claim in that meeting. The chief of staff to the finance minister would go to staff members of the Attorney General and say the same thing. He said, Ben Chin said, that the announcement of a headquarters move could happen within days, and we needed to prevent it because there was a Quebec election going on. That seemed mighty suspicious, because a little bit of research on Dr. Google would prove that moving the SNC headquarters is impossible. A $1.5 billion loan agreement between the company and the Quebec pension plan requires that the headquarters stay there until the year 2024, another half decade. The company just signed a 20-year lease on its headquarters there and is in the process of spending millions of dollars to renovate specifically for the purpose of accommodating its 2,000 employees in that city. So it's not only contractually impossible, it's physically unbelievable that the company would leave. And today, if you don't take any of that as sufficient enough proof, today, the CEO of SNC-Lavalin made clear that that was not going to happen. In fact, he was asked, well, where did this come from? And he said, I don't know how people get ideas like that in their head. This was his quote today. But only the Prime Minister knows how he got that idea in his head. Now today, he denied ever making the headquarters claim. Unfortunately, this is the problem. When you don't tell the truth, it becomes very difficult to keep track of your story. Unfortunately for him, we have him on tape, claiming that SNC will leave Canada altogether if it's convicted of fraud and bribery. He said it in his famous non-apology press conference, there where he repeated that false claim that he had earlier said to the Attorney General, so we know that he was going around stating that falsehood. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is bad enough that the Prime Minister of Canada faces allegations of interfering with a criminal prosecution to get charges set aside. But this scandal reaches a whole new level of criminal culpability if the Prime Minister or anyone around him deliberately stated a falsehood to a law officer in order to shelve criminal charges. It is an offense under Section 139 of the Criminal Code to obstruct, pervert, or defeat the course of justice. Lying to a law officer to get her to set aside charges would obstruct, pervert, and defeat the course of justice. Now, it is possible that during her testimony, the former AG did not realize that that falsehood had been stated, but had been stated to her and that it was not true. But these are the questions we need answered, and that's why we need to end the cover-up, let the former Attorney General complete her testimony, and proceed with an investigation at the Ethics Committee. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
I thank the member from Carleton for starting off this debate, and it's an important one, but I want to clarify a couple of things. In the 4 hours of testimony that was given by the former Attorney General before the Justice Committee, what she stated is that she stated that the Prime Minister told her this was her decision to take. She said specifically that it was appropriate to discuss job impacts. She said that nothing that transpired was unlawful, nor was anything criminal. And I want to return to the point where she said it was appropriate to discuss job impacts, because the member from Carleton has said it on repeated occasions in this House, questioning about why jobs are being considered in this context. And what I'm talking about here is actually referring back to the statute, because the statute should actually ground our analysis of what we're talking about here. And 715.31 of the Criminal Code in subsection F says the purpose of the statute is to reduce the negative consequences of the wrongdoing for persons, namely employees, customers, pensioners, and others. Does the member from Carleton agree that when you cite employees in the statute, it gives the legitimacy to make appropriate inquiries about job impacts?
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Except there were no job impacts.
That's right.
The reality is that the company isn't going anywhere. They're required to stay in Montreal under a loan agreement with the Quebec Pension Plan. As I said, they just renovated their office there, signed a 20-year lease. All of their construction projects in Canada require them to keep their employees doing that work here in Canada. And today, the CEO of SNC-Lavalin said first that he never claimed 9,000 jobs would vanish. At the very worst, he says those workers will continue working in Canada for other companies. That's at the very worst. And secondly, that the headquarters isn't going anywhere, and he doesn't know where anyone would have got that idea. So he can parse legal language all he wants, even if it were legal for the Attorney General to consider job impacts. There are no job impacts to consider.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Cowichan-Malahat Langford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member for Carleton for his speech. You know, at the heart of this matter is the notion of prosecutorial independence. This is really the crux of the issue here. And I feel like through this whole sordid affair, we've finally been able to lift the curtain and have a peek at the inner workings of the PMO. You know, the heart of the matter is that the Director of Public Prosecutions, who had all of the evidence of the company's wrongdoings before her, made a decision. She is entitled to make that decision. The Attorney General agreed that that was final. And what the Liberals seem to be advocating for or supporting is that it's okay to apply political pressure on the independence of our top prosecutor. I would just like the member for Carleton to explain to this House, and indeed to Canadians, how dangerous of a precedent that would be for this country, and how prosecutorial independence must be protected at all costs.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
To answer that question, Madam Speaker, I ask you to imagine a world in which a Prime Minister is able to interfere in criminal prosecutions to have charges set aside. Imagine if that were a regular occurrence. If powerful people accused of crimes could knock on the door of the PMO and say, "Can you help me get this dropped?" And then the Prime Minister picked up the phone or met in person with the Attorney General and said, "Make it happen." What kind of world would we live in if that's how justice is administered? Why would we even have a prosecutor, or a judge for that matter, if prime ministers and other politicians have the ability to shelve charges? It's a massive concept. Like, it's just mind-boggling that he thought it was okay. He and his team contacted her 20 times. She documented it. She said there were veiled threats. She was hounded, in her words. She compared it to the Saturday Night Massacre, Richard Nixon, which is a reference to Richard Nixon's firings to cover up Watergate. Right. Yep. This isn't a conservative spewing these allegations. This is the former Liberal Attorney General appointed by the Prime Minister. That is incredibly serious. And while he tried to shut down a criminal trial earlier, now he's trying to shut down an investigation of it today. We won't let him. We are convening the Ethics Committee. It's beginning its investigation. He better show up and answer some questions.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for